Too many young people get in this mindset that they are a failure, that they aren't good enough. And they get encouraged down a certain path that maybe isn't right for them, but they feel that they have to because that's what everyone does. And they're to succeed in life, they need to tick X, Y, Z box. And for some people, that's the right path for them, but it's not for everybody. I'm not saying give up schools and go on expeditions, although I think expeditions teaches so much more important stuff. I think there's too much focus on grades rather than grit. I remember my head of sixth form kind of saying to me that Everest and all this extracurricular stuff was going to neglect my future. A few years later, I then got paid by my school to go and speak to the kids. I was 18, so I was trying to be the second youngest Brit to climb the mountain. We were about 3 weeks into the expedition when there was a massive avalanche in the icefall, which killed 16 people. Biggest disaster in Everest history at the time. Things go wrong in the mountains, as you know yourself, and the mountain doesn't give a damn how hard you've worked, how much you spent, how hard you've trained. That's the reality of nature. It reduces that sense of entitlement, and instead of blaming the situation, it taught me to really take responsibility and to take ownership of that situation. To the point that now, if anything bad happens in life, my general reaction is just to think, okay, what's the opportunity here?
We can all find our own Everests in life that can challenge you and build resilience in other ways.
Where you are right now has no resemblance on where you might be in a few years' time. And really now the purpose is about giving something back. I realised that, chasing the next big goal, the next big mountain, it's kind of an endless pursuit. Whereas if you can leave something bigger behind, that's kind of where I find that definition of success.
Thank you very much, Alex, joining me. How are you finding navigating the bustling streets of inner London versus the open trails of the greater outdoors?
I love being here. I mean, in short bursts. I'm really fortunate. I'm based up in Cumbria, so I'm surrounded by my happy place, by the fells and the lakes and the hills. But I'm down here a lot for work and for speaking events. So I do like the change of pace and just the different places to eat and all the different cultures and the vibes. But I do like being here. But when it depends. It depends. When the travel's running smoothly, it's great. When it's not, it can be a real pain. But it's always an adventure, really.
It must be quite a weird thing. I'm always been quite a city person. I've lived here for over 12 years now. I'm the kind of person who escapes to the mountains, and I'm like, wow, this place exists. And like, you live like almost like a polar life. You exist in the Lake Districts, surrounded by these great hills and mountains, and then you come into the city life, and suddenly this is like, you've got functioning transport, you've got 24/7 conveniences. What does it feel like from being in a perspective from being in a very rural sense to coming into the city?
I mean, I've never lived in a city, and I'm definitely not that person, as you say. I mean, if I lived in a city, the only city I could probably live in is probably Edinburgh, because you have that combination of the outdoors and being in a big city, and it has a lot of history. I enjoy being down for the short times, but I think I'm very happy to get on the train and get home and see the hills and just go, breathe. But it's good to change pace, to change your environment. Your mindset, dictates. So your environment dictates your mindset. So it's good to speed things up. It is, because I think if you get stuck in the same environment all the time, you get stuck in the same thinking. But I realize how fortunate I am, and there's pros and cons to both. Like now I have to cycle 3 miles to get to a shop, or run there. Whereas obviously in London, you've got probably a Pret every, 300 meters away. And I end up spending far too much on food when I'm here because I can. But for me, I think nature is where I'm meant to be. I think we're all meant to be, but we just adapt to where we are.
I love how you say, if you want to get to the shops, you cycle or you run there. There's a great sense of adventure just behind having to go to the shops. I love that. Yeah. I love the fact that you're challenging yourself, not just to be like, oh, I can drive there. No, there's a form of transport which is actually more adventurous, that I can go travel to the shops.
To be honest, it was kind of forced on me. So I would normally drive there. I moved to where I am now about 2.5 years ago. So I was kind of moving out of Kendal. Before that, I was in walking distance of all these things. But then when I moved away, I'm just outside of Kendal. So I have like the best view of the Old Man of Coniston and the Fells. And I've got like 4 different hills I can run to from my front door. But then I lost my driving license on my coast to coast run, which went a bit wrong, which I'm sure we'll talk about. And so I now can't drive for 12 months. So cycling and running is really my own means of transport. And my girlfriend is a big help with driving me places when needed. But before I started to drive, I used to cycle everywhere. I didn't learn to drive till I was 23. And I think we get so stuck in this convenience lifestyle. It's convenient, so we avoid discomfort until suddenly that's taken away from you. And if I can combine my runs or bike rides with errands and going to town, then I'll do that. And I think that's how it used to be, So it's when it's a nice sunny day, I don't mind. When it's chucking down, I will get a taxi. It depends.
Yeah, I can relate to that. When I was in the middle of my run streak, I would very often use one of my daily runs to go to the supermarket. So I'd take my rucksack and I'd run back. And it was very hilarious how slower you'd be on the way back when you got a sack full of heavy shopping on the way back. But that was a great way to understand that when you prioritize exercise and going outside, it's incredible how you can combine it with other things in your life that you would not think of before.
I mean, if I'm doing kind of a food shop, generally I will do, like a big one online. But if I need something, I've ran back up the hill to home. Unfortunately, I live at the top of a hill, so it's great getting down to town, not so great on the way back up. When I've got a rucksack full of, katsu curry and soup and soy milk and all these things, and obviously it's I can't fit a lot in my little running pack, but it does feel a bit daft. But at the same time, having a purpose to these things, I think, especially when you're struggling for that kind of motivation in running as well, I think having a purpose to it is a really good way of forcing yourself out. And I say to people, if they're struggling to motivate themselves to get outside and challenge themselves, attach it to something else, whether it's cycling to work, for example, or something. It just it gives you a better incentive to get out, I think.
Can you mentioned you lost your driving license on your epic run. Is that your photo license? Mm-hmm. And if you lose your license, you can't drive?
No. So just to clarify, I didn't lose it because I was speeding around Asda. It was very much a medical thing. So basically, because I had a seizure during my run, I was about 78 miles into my run, and I was having a nap in the support van, and then I was getting up to go. I was getting up to carry on after 21 hours, and I started to feel a bit faint. And I just had porridge and coffee, and I was kind of bending down to tie my shoes on and get the pack good to go. And I remember just having to sit back down in the bed in the van and just try and compose myself. And then before I knew it, I was kind of half conscious, hearing voices around me, world spinning, that kind of lack of awareness of what's going on around you, but you're awake and it's quite frightening. And I just had my first seizure in 17 years. So doing the right thing to do, I obviously reported that on the DVLA, and because of that, the standard process is to take your license off you for 12 months. Because I had epilepsy as a child, they probably put two and two together. And I think it's the safest thing to do, but in reality, I think it was probably overcautious, because I saw a consultant neurologist who felt that it wasn't epilepsy at all. It was probably more a one-off isolated event triggered by the stress of ultra running, rather than my epilepsy, which I've not been on medication for 17 years. And I wouldn't have done any of the adventures or any of the outdoor things I've done since had I had epilepsy, because I would have put myself and other people at risk. But that was a real blow, not only to fail the run, but then to lose my ability to drive. And so I did the only logical thing in that situation, and I bought a new bike, because that's the solution to most things. Like, who says money can't buy happiness? And so the bike is kind of my new car. And to be fair, it costs more than my car did as well. Now I know it's not the same. If I'm going to a talk, if I'm in smart business clothes, I can't cycle on the A6 out of Kendal. And when it's winter, when it's dark, when it's wet, it's not practical or safe sometimes. But on the whole, where I can, I cycle now. And the thing I miss most is not being able to have the freedom to go into the hills as much. Now, although I'm in the Lake District, to get into the proper hills, I'm still not in the national park as such. I'm still half an hour drive away from probably the nearest kind of Wainwrights, for example. when I want to get a proper run in. So that's been the one thing I do miss, is that freedom. But where I can, I've been trying to adapt, and now I cycle to the hills instead, which is a double workout. So there's always a way, it's just about your mindset and how you see it. And I guess reflecting on the fact that I said I didn't drive till I was 23. And before then, I only knew what I had, which is my bike. So I cycle everywhere. And when you get a car, I think a lot of people say, oh, how did I manage before? Until if that's all you know, then that's all you know. And it's kind of, you just have to change your reality.
I guess we'll come and talk about your coast to coast later on in the conversation. I suppose as a form of introduction, for those of you who don't know who you are, how would you introduce yourself in your own words and what you stand for and represent?
I would describe myself as, I guess, an adventurer, an ultra runner, author, speaker, and I'm a founder of a mental health charity called Mind Over Mountains. I was born in Chester. I've been in Kendal for 6 years. I'm 29 at the moment. And in terms of what I stand for and what my journey is about, in simple terms, it's about overcoming adversity for adventure. And that's really been my narrative in my life now since I was a teenager. And so really I find my purpose and my passion in life from, challenging myself, pushing the limits, trying to achieve my full potential whilst using that journey to inspire other people to overcome their challenges, to discover what's possible. And the outdoors has always been my way of dealing with life challenges, especially when it comes to my mental health. And really now the purpose is about giving something back, leaving something bigger behind. Because I realized a few years ago that, chasing the next big goal, the next big mountain, it's kind of an endless pursuit. Whereas if you can leave something bigger behind, that's kind of where I find that definition of success. So the charity is my legacy. That's my way of giving something back. And I'm really lucky that my work, my life passion all tie into each other because, the speaking is a day job. I spend a lot of time talking about adventures, not as much time as I'd like actually doing the big adventures. And then the charity is the piece that all feeds into that. So in hindsight, that's what I stand for, living life on my own terms and just raising a middle finger to adversity in whatever form it is.
You've done so much at such a young age. You mentioned your age there, 29. It's quite remarkable what you have achieved in the world of adventure, in the world of charity as well. You were 18 and trying to tackle Everest, which is a crazy young age as well, to be tackling the biggest mountain in the world. We'll talk a little bit about that. But you mentioned facing adversity. I understand that school was an incredible hard time for you.
Mm-hmm. I think the biggest challenges are always close to home, and it's important to talk about that because otherwise people that see all the challenges that you've done and the adventures and think, oh, well, that's great, but I couldn't do that because of X, Y, Z. And I want people to be able to relate to that and to connect with the things that they're facing. And I think a lot of people have a tough time at school. And I was really fortunate. I was brought up in Chester. I'm an only child. My parents gave me a great start. Everything was very normal, very comfortable as far as I knew it. And when I was about 9, I had my first seizure. So I remember waking up under a table it was a biology class at school. And 1 minute I was a student, next minute I was a lesson, and that was a pretty terrifying thing to obviously go through at such a young age. And that was when I was diagnosed as having epilepsy, which was only a very mild form. But that itself was the trigger for lots of different challenges and anxiety and panic attacks, from the whole hospital experience. I'm still now very, very, very nervous when it comes to health and hospitals. If I have a blood test, I have to lie down, otherwise I'll pass out, or worse. And so that was the real kind of catalyst, really. That was my kind of big trigger when I was about 9. And then I've had a stammer all my life as well, which has perhaps been caused by a lot of this, although I seem to have that before the seizure started. So I don't quite know how that got into the mix. The stammer is something that comes and goes when it likes. It's very covert, which means I swap words to try and avoid a block, but there are times when it's really bad, when I cannot say a single word. I've smashed up phones at home in that frustration of being unable to say my own name. I struggle with words beginning with C and K, which isn't ideal when you're from Kelsall and now live in Kendal. Maybe that's why I haven't climbed like K2 yet. And so I remember at school, I'd be hiding in the toilets because I'd be so scared of having to speak in front of all my classmates, because they used to force us to do that and read stuff out. And so that really held me back, at least from a confidence perspective, having that interpersonal sort of skill. I just avoided conversations at the best part. I was badly bullied because kids are very kind and considerate, and because I was different.
Yeah.
Makes you a target, right? And so it was all very, very verbal, and when I think about it now, it's like, it doesn't really mean anything. But when you're young, when you're that age, it really hurts. It really stings. And so that really didn't help with the self-confidence or the self-esteem.
Because at that time in your life, your school life is your life.
Yeah.
It's hard to see anything else that exists. And if you're struggling and if you're being made to feel uncomfortable at school by the people around you, it's the worst thing in the world. I've been there.
Yeah, and it is. And it was tormenting, and it was just this feeling of being a victim, why am I not good enough? We all want to be accepted. We all want to fit in at school, especially at that age. You're trying to find out where you fit in the world. And that approval from our friends and from society is, as you say, is probably the biggest priority for us at that time of life. And so because of all this, I felt very different and like I was born to fail, like I wasn't good enough. And to add to all that, I was just hopeless at sport. I was the kid that refused to take part in sports day, came second to last in cross country in year 7 at high school, just detested exercise, which is kind of interesting. Bear in mind the things I do now for fun. I feel like I'm listing a long list of, poor me stories, but that was the reality of how I felt at school. And so I wasn't your born adventurer. It wasn't like it was, instilled in me from an early age. But that was where I was at, and things could have been a whole lot worse. I was safe, I was fed, I was comfortable, I was healthy, but I had to deal with that. And it's all relative. You always have this mentality with people saying, oh, well, it could be so much worse, like cheer up, well, what have you got to feel bad about? But it's only relative to what you know. And I'm fortunate now that having had the experiences I've had, that it puts things in perspective in terms of what's really bad. But only when you have that experience can you do that, if that makes sense. Yeah,
and it's incredibly, like you say, it's incredibly difficult to see outside that world. If you were to go back to, the 14-year-old self again, or to talk to the 14-year-old self again, do you think you could say anything to him to help that situation?
I get asked this a lot, and kind of what advice would I give to my 14-year-old self? Whether I would have paid any attention or trusted it, I don't know. But I think I said that nobody can make you feel bad without your permission. And I laugh now at all the things that used to happen to me and that I was called, because they're really meaningless. And I'm really grateful in some ways, for what happened to me. Not because any young person should have to go through that, but because it's played a big part in getting to where I am today. But I would say that. I'd say it's pure, how you respond to that is your own choice. And actually, don't waste so much energy trying to fit in, trying to be accepted. And it took me quite a few years to actually realize that and stop trying to fit in and stop caring and being happy to be different. Most of the things that we worry about in life never really happen, or they're never as bad as we think they're going to be. And I remember being so anxious at times that I wouldn't even leave the house without my parents because I was scared of having another seizure. And I remember even saying to a school teacher that, like, I'd never actually get married because I'd never be able to say my vows, and I'd never be able to, speak in public or anything because of my stammer. And now I'm a professional speaker speaking to hundreds of people on a stage, and all those little things that I thought I could never do. So I guess what I say to myself is just don't worry about what you don't know. Just be in the now, really. Don't get caught up in the future too much, because you have no idea where things are going to go. Just trust the process.
And now that you've had this kind of wealth of experience and, discovering, your true potential and what you can achieve and celebrating that, how can we change the kind of toxic culture that exists in schools that preys on kids who are different? Is there, going forward in how you've been able to kind of, work now with your charity and help change perceptions and work with people to discover their own potential, is there a bigger discussion that could be had with schools to say, we need to change the culture of bullying?
Mm-hmm. I'm no expert on this, and I don't really know the answer. I still speak a lot in schools and around resilience and mental health and motivation and achieving potential. And it's something that pops up all the time. Schools are always saying to me, you've got a big issue with mental health and anxiety and bullying. And I sense that teachers are so overwhelmed and so busy that they don't really have the time to properly deal with it, and they want to, but it's just such an endemic problem. And I don't know the answer to that. But what I think we need to be talking about is this perception of, success is your grades, is your performance, because I think there's too much focus on grades rather than grit. And the students that maybe don't fit into that model, maybe they struggle with school and education and academia because of perhaps a condition or just because that's just who they are. Some people are just not gifted in that way, but they have so many other gifts and talents that aren't being recognized. Is recognizing and celebrating those young people. I remember, and with the best intentions, I remember my head of sixth form kind of saying to me that, Everest and all this extracurricular stuff was going to neglect my future. Because that's what the system is kind of trained to teach them, is that actually we need to get grades to then go to university and then have all these options in life. A few years later, I then got paid by my school to go and speak to the kids, which felt like a full circle moment for me to be in that same hall where I was giving my very first talk to a high school back in 2013 when I was trying to fundraise some expeditions. And ultimately, I think too many young people get in this mindset that they are a failure, that they aren't good enough. And for me, just to be seen would have made all the difference. Not to try and solve the problems, but just to be encouraged to find my own path. And I see a lot of people my own age and around the same generation where they go to university, they get kind of encouraged down a certain path that maybe isn't right for them, but they feel that they have to because that's what everyone does. And they're to succeed in life, they need to tick X, Y, Z box. And for some people, that's the right path for them, but it's not for everybody. And there is a conversation, I think, to be had around the sense of identity and purpose, because I think that's fundamental to our well-being, and when I've been in my lowest points, it's because I've lost that sense of purpose or I've had it taken away from me. And therefore it's like, well, what's the point of getting out of bed in the morning? And I have friends who we all had the same start, we had the same chances in life, but they are still struggling to find their purpose in life because they've been forced into a system that maybe wasn't right for them. So I'm not saying give up schools and go on expeditions, although I think expeditions teaches so much more important stuff. And I've been really fortunate to have had that experience. But
what kind of things do you think they teach you, these expeditions?
Blimey. Well, maybe don't climb Everest if I'm there. That sense of confidence, resilience, adaptability. Things go wrong in the mountains, as you know yourself, and the mountain doesn't give a damn how hard you've worked, how much you've spent, how hard you've trained. That's the reality of nature. Is it reduces that sense of entitlement, that sense of like, oh, if you work really hard, you can get anything you want in life. Well, sometimes the mountain doesn't give a damn. And there is this illusion that I think I bought into as a student that, if I work really hard, I can have anything I want. Now, you work very hard, you can achieve most things you want, and you've got to work hard to achieve them, but nothing is guaranteed. And instead of blaming the situation, it taught me to really take responsibility and to take ownership of that situation. To the point that now, if anything bad happens in life, my general reaction quite quickly is just to think, okay, what's the opportunity here? And depending on the expedition, of course, and where you go and what happens, but it gave me a perspective at a young age in terms of what's really important in life. When you see one of the poorest countries in the world who've lost nearly everything in an earthquake, still having that humanity, that resourcefulness to find the opportunity, to find the positives, to help each other in this worst possible situation, kind of makes you realize that a lot of stuff in life isn't that bad. And I came home from that, and when a bus is late or it's raining, or I'm caught in traffic, yeah, it's annoying, but it doesn't really bother you anymore. Don't get me wrong, if I'm tired, I still get frustrated at the slightest things, but it gives you perspective, and you realize where you spend your energy is so important. And I think more than anything, it gives you that confidence that you can get through most things. If I can survive that, then I can probably get through most other things. It takes you away from that constant technology overload. There's some parts of the trip where there's no electricity, never mind any Wi-Fi or devices, and that is something I think is important. Just having time away from technology, just actually having time to connect with yourself rather than your TikTok feed. And also it teaches you to work with other people, maybe people you don't necessarily want to be with or get on with. You're forced in a tent. You're in there for weeks and weeks together. You have very different values, different missions. Okay, you're all there for the same goal, but actually you find that everybody's so different. And I think that's a really important skill, to be able to handle conflicts and to be able to, hold your own in that environment. I mean, the list goes on, really.
I love your thought process about, in the face of adversity, you have to think, what is the opportunity here? And that you're talking about having a shift in mindset, in saying, okay, yes, something negative has happened, but how can I see it in a different light? And it's quite easy when something negative happens to think of all the negativity that just compounds onto that problem and makes you feel like you are just being buried under. It just takes a little shift in mindset to be like, okay, this is the situation I find myself in. How can I find opportunity? It's very difficult, I suppose, for some people who aren't perhaps trained to have that kind of switch in mindset. It's like, how do I find the goodness in the bad? And especially when there's different levels of adversity.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, it's not really a question really, but I'm just curious as to kind of how you train yourself to always think that way. Because there are people who they're just always positive, always happy, and no matter whatever they face, they can find some positivity out of it. And there's other people who don't. And how do we shift more people away from that negativity into finding the joy and opportunity in life at all moments?
I think there are those people that are just annoyingly positive.
But that's got to come from somewhere, right?
Yeah.
It's a practice, right? It's got to...
I think it is with practice. It's something you have to work on, and it's not a permanent state. Well, there might be some people that are permanently positive. For me, very much that resilience is not a permanent state. It depends on a lot of things. If you've had a bad night's sleep, if you've been caught in traffic, if you've had a family bereavement, your resilience and your positivity is probably going to be affected. But it is something we can practice every day. And yeah, I think experiences shape it. And a lot of those people that you mentioned most of them have probably had some major life event or trauma that has forced them one of two ways. There's kind of there's the post-traumatic growth mentality, or there is that situation having a really bad effect on them and therefore going the opposite way. And although you say, it depends on, obviously not a lot of people have had those experiences. We can practice it every day. It's just about those simple reframing things. So if somebody's going to work and if the trains are delayed or whatever, or you miss your train, or, somebody cuts you up in traffic, or, you drop your phone or something happens, it's just challenging thoughts. Just noticing that self-awareness piece is the first step. Okay, actually, how am I thinking about this? And actually, is there another way I can think about it? And if you challenge your thoughts on a regular basis, like anything, it starts to become a habit, and then it becomes your default reaction. And I think you have to have the confidence to fail as well. You've got to have the opportunity to fail and realize that the world doesn't end. And that partly comes by challenging yourself in the first place and putting yourself in the situations, because I think that there's an interesting kind of mix of, there's that kind of proactive resilience, there's actually by, challenging yourself, doing a marathon, doing your first race, for example, going and trying something new that you've never done before, doing the presentation you're scared of doing. There's like voluntary challenges. Then there's that reactive resilience, which is your ability to cope with stuff that you never signed up for, whether that, illness, job stress, or family problems, etc., etc. And that reactive resilience to me is a piece around well-being. It's a piece around, healthy habits, being able to cope with stress and having your own tools. And the proactive resilience is almost raising that threshold. And I think it comes back into that piece of every day just reframing how you think about everything. And over time, it feels like it lands as a standard reaction. Now, it's still being human. It's good to have a bit of a moan, a bit of a whinge, as long as that's only short term. Let it all out, but don't dwell on it. And I saw this on Everest, when we got back from there. Some of us on the team were very much a case of, right, okay, how do we help? What do we do here? Some people were, very much blaming the situation. Why is this isn't fair? Why did this happen? Poor us, rather than a case that it's happened. How do we grow from it?
And well, just to kind of signpost, when you talk about what happened at Everest, you have been to Everest twice to try and conquer that famous mountain. But on both occasions were met with an incredibly unfortunate, tragic incident. Which let's talk about that now while we're on the topic, and about what happened there and how you were able to shift your mindset into understanding that perhaps there's a greater power and that the mountains sometimes do control.
Yeah, well, in that case of starting with the first attempt, so I went there in 2014 for the first attempt. I was 18, so I was trying to be the second youngest Brit to climb the mountain, and the youngest from the south side in Nepal, because the youngest was from the north side in Tibet. But it's important to give context prior to that, because Everest has a stereotype of being full of, very wealthy Westerners. And I was not from that bracket in that regard. I had to raise the £35,000 through sponsorship myself whilst I was still doing A-levels. Very much it's a normal kind of, sort of middle class background. My parents weren't going to sign me a check for it. I was washing pots in a pub. That wasn't going to pay for it. My dad said, it's a lot of money for a holiday, Al. He would say that, being from Yorkshire. So I had to, find a way to make one. And so over those 4 years, I took the steps I needed to get myself in a position to be able to attempt the mountain safely. And we were about 3 weeks into the expedition. We were about a day away from base camp when there was a massive avalanche in the icefall, which killed 16 people. Biggest disaster in Everest history at the time. So we had to pack up and go home, without stepping a single foot on the mountain. And that for me was a real shifting point, because when I was raising the money, when I was getting to the mountain, my biggest fear was failure. And it was a sense of like failure wasn't even an option. It wasn't even going to consider it, because I was still caught in this naive illusion that if I work really hard in life, you can get anything you want. But that doesn't factor in that sometimes failure is inevitable, because so much in life is outside of our control, whether that's the pandemic, health, weather, the traffic, what's happening on the news. And mountains are a great example of that, but we don't go to adventure for uncertainty. I mean, if it was certain, that would be a tour holiday, not an adventure. And there was obviously an initial sense of shock and disbelief and disappointment, that we didn't even get to start on the mountain. But again, a realization that obviously we were fortunate. We were going home safe to our families. And the Sherpas always said, the biggest success is safety, not the summit. But then it was a case of, right, what the hell do I do now? Because this wasn't meant to happen. I thought that if I didn't reach the top, it might be because of my health or fitness or the altitude or something, not because of this. But when I realized that failure can be inevitable, it suddenly became a lot less scary. And then I gave myself permission to fail more often. And so there's a real shift. Failure was a motivator in terms of like, I want to work really, really hard because I don't want to fail. To then realizing actually failure is fine, because failure may be, failure to achieve a certain objective, but it's not the end goal. In that sense, like the real failure for me is not attempting in the first place and not getting back up and not learning from it, not trying again, which sounds very much like a cliche you'd sort of tell kids, but I think it's just simple as that, and it brought the benefits that I gave myself permission to fail. But at the same time, I have struggled to motivate myself to the same level because I'm not as afraid of failure, because actually the world didn't end. In fact, not summiting Everest on both attempts actually has brought me far bigger opportunities that I never anticipated, which I'm really grateful for. Had I summited Everest, I don't know if those things would have happened. So that's kind of where it all came from, really, is that mindset shift of, things are out of my control here, but actually what matters is my response. Therefore, I'm kind of in control to an extent. Everest the following year didn't go much better, and got the funds together again, went back a year stronger. It took another year to train, to really switch my focus to the kind of mental side of training rather than the physical side. And we were leaving base camp in the early hours of the morning on the 25th of April, 2015. And we were about half an hour away from Camp 1 when the earthquake hit Nepal. So we were just below Camp 1 when that happened. And we were trapped on the mountain for 2 days at 6,000 meters. And that was, for me, the first time in my life at 19 that I've genuinely believed that was it. Game over. Any second now, I want to die.
How do you process a life-threatening event in that moment?
I mean,
and at such a young age as well.
Well, I think you can't train for something like that. And interestingly, like a lot of the people on the team that perhaps managed it a lot better and coped a lot better were the ones who'd had military training or sort of medical training, because they are trained to cope under pressure and crisis, But even then, I think you can't really predict how you're going to react in that environment. I think initially when the earthquake hit, the ironic thing is I didn't actually feel the earthquake. I was on my own at this point. I was about half an hour away from camp. Most of my team had raced ahead of me because I was having a really bad day in terms of just my performance. Being at altitude is such a weird game that affects everybody differently. And I was always the first one to get ill. I took ages to acclimatize. And because of that, I was moving on my own, which is quite normal in the icefall. It's not a particularly difficult section. And I was pulling on the rope. I was focusing one step at a time. And all I remember was this massive crack, the sound of ice breaking off the mountain like it had the year before. And, behind that, you've got this primal roar of an avalanche coming straight for us. And yet the fog was so thick in the Western Cone that I couldn't see anything was happening. I couldn't see what was coming towards us. I can just hear this thing. And so I remember moving as fast as I could, this sense of panic, more energy than I had all day, this massive panic adrenaline surge. And after a short while, I remember, assuming that I was safe because I was kind of confused. Like, where's this thing going to come from? Maybe it's fallen behind us. And so at no point did I realize there was actually an earthquake until this big blast of powder hit us, And in the initial aftermath of that, it could have been seconds, it could have been a minute. You kind of lose all track of time. You're just being hit by this big blast of white. I got on the radio. There was no response. I was like, okay. I tried again, no response. So I assumed that my teammates behind me, Tim and Ellis, were gone because, they were a bit further back in the route. I thought there's nothing I can do to help them on my own. I've got to get to Camp 1. I've got to get to safety. And in that point, I was very much in shock. I was in survival mode. It was just a case of I need to get to Camp 1 where the rest of the team are, where our supplies are. It all felt very much a blur, but then all the ropes were buried. So I had to sort of pull them out of the fresh snow that had come from the avalanche. I didn't even think that, okay, there was a risk of falling in a crevasse here. It was a case of I just need to get out of here quick. I came across 2 guys in my team who were a lot older than me, a lot stronger than me. And they were just hugging each other. We were all crying. They had their glasses, literally blown out by the force of the wind. And then we're like, has anybody else survived? Because we couldn't see Camp 1. The first tent we could see was completely flattened. And then I'm not quite sure what happened next, but I know Rolf and Rob, 2 of our leaders, kind of emerged out of the cloud. And I found out later on from the team that were up at Camp 1, from a good friend of mine, Dan, that basically they were essentially kind of on a rescue mission. They weren't expecting to find me, Ellis and Tim, because they just assumed that we were in the icefall, that we were gone. So essentially they were coming to try and find our bodies, which really hit me when I heard that at the time. But in the initial aftermath, it was very much just shock. Everyone reacts differently to that. And I don't think you know how you're going to react until you're in the situation. I just kind of lay there like a vegetable. I was sharing a tent with Aeneas in my team. And he took really good care of me. He forced me to eat and drink, no matter how bad I felt and how much I complained. And he knew that if I didn't stay hydrated and stay fueled, that I was going to be in no position. Had we needed to move off the mountain, I would have been incapacitated. And also being dehydrated makes you much more prone to altitude sickness, which is really not what I wanted when I was trapped at Camp 1 for God knows how long. We were told we could be there for a week. We had supplies for maybe a couple of days at most. And every half an hour, we've got aftershocks and avalanches hitting us from both sides. But I remember getting on the radio or overhearing Rob on the radio to Henry, our base camp manager, and just hearing the panic in his voice and him saying, it's chaos. Everything's gone. And we're all trying to sort of visualize, how is it gone? Well, what do you mean it's gone? How can base camp be gone? We had no idea at this point about this avalanche that had come down. And it was only in the tent with Aeneas when he was talking about the earthquake. And I said, what earthquake? He's like, didn't you feel it? And I didn't feel the ground bouncing and bouncing and bouncing because I was just so knackered that day. But in those 2 days, I was just kind of in shock, which is why I gave up. And I was so grateful that he forced me to kind of eat regardless. Because at that point, it was what's the point? What's the point? And everyone reacted very different in that situation. Some people just shut down altogether. Some people were very proactive, were on the case. They got us out of there. I remember ringing home on my satellite phone. At this point, it hadn't broken on the international news. So my mum was like, hi, how are you feeling? How's it going? Are you at Camp 1 yet? I was like, listen, there's been a bit of a problem. And I remember being sworn and cursed and her crying down the phone, and the guilt just tore my heart out. And when we got back down, so we got airlifted by helicopters because that was our only option down back to base camp. The next 2 days, we tried to help in any way we could. We were kind of walking around camp trying to salvage stuff, because everything was thrown half a mile away, by the force of the wind. It was just absolute carnage. It was like a bomb blast. You just don't know where to start. Some of us decided to stay. Some basically kind of chartered a helicopter and just got themselves out of there. But we wanted to try and help, but also not add stress to the airports, to all the systems when there's thousands of people trying to get out. The biggest priority is the people who are injured and searching for people who are missing, not a load of climbers who are actually quite comfortable. So we stayed to kind of stay out of the way for a bit, let them get because all the injured were obviously the biggest priority, and 22 people had died at base camp, including 3 of our Sherpas. And at that point, I was very much in survival mode. Like, it was a case of, right, how can we help? And I remember like digging up oxygen masks, which are worth thousands of dollars. And it was like a glimmer of actually giving something back in the really bad situation, kind of helping the team. And it wasn't really until I got back to the airport. As I remember, I was in Doha Airport. I can't even remember how I got a flight home. It was all a blur to me. I remember being in the airport on my own and seeing a news article about the earthquake and reading about a British trekker who was about my age, who'd been killed on a trek in the earthquake. And only then did it hit me. And I remember just breaking down in the airport. I remember just like crying my eyes out in the middle of the airport terminal in Doha. And that was when this kind of shock wore off and the survival mode wore off. So a case of, oh, bugger, this has really happened and I'm part of this. And when I got home, there wasn't really any sense of relief. It was more a case of like, I don't know where I fit anymore. And this sense of guilt. I couldn't even enjoy having a meal because it's like, I shouldn't be here. Why me? Why not them? Why did the Sherpas have to die? Because they just doing their jobs. I chose to be on that mountain and I put myself in the risk, in the danger. And base camp is meant to be the safest place. Yeah, being on the mountain was actually the safest place because we didn't get hit by this massive avalanche triggered by the earthquake. So the processing thing was not immediate, but initially it was guilt. And then over the next weeks and months, I turned to nature to try and heal. I moved in the Lake District. I was working at a youth hostel for a few months because I thought I need to be in my happy place. I need to have the mountains to make sense of it all. I started writing my first book, Icefall. And then I had to leave that job because I was spending too much time on my bike and not enough time writing. But I think writing was a big part of my process because it helped me to really just, I guess, to process it. It was very therapeutic, but also to really get what was a very unique story down on paper and out of my head. So that was how I dealt with it, really. That and then fundraising, throw myself into fundraising for people in Nepal, using the profile and the story of the expedition to say, right now we need to do something. And that summer I decided if I couldn't climb Everest, I was going to cycle it. So I cycled up and down Great Dunfell in the Pennines, which is about 29,000 vertical feet in 24 hours. So again, that whole mindset of, okay, what's the opportunity?
It's kind of a very fitting end, actually, to understand that it was never going to be your course to summit Everest on those 2 years that you went. It was out of your control. Mm-hmm. And so much of you talked about is how things are out of your control. You have to come to terms with that and understand that there is a higher power involved, and to frame the fact that you were very incredibly lucky to still be here today to tell the story. But how you could find other Everests in life. I mean, one of them, as you've talked about, is, cycling up and down a hill, to summit the equivalent elevation of Everest is a very common thing on which cyclists can do, Everesting. A very tough challenge as well. I said it took you 24 hours. I can imagine it's a very, very, very hard thing to do. But what does this say about how we can all find our own Everests in life, and how you've used that going forward, but you can find other things elsewhere in life that can challenge you and build resilience in other ways?
Yeah, I see Everest as a metaphor for that one big goal, one big thing that we really want to do, the life-changing thing. I know a lot of people don't like it, but frankly, we all have a big goal. And so why not call it Everest? I mean, Everest is just a metaphor for the highest mountain in the world, and is often seen as the pinnacle of achievement. And for me, it happened to just be the mountain. It caught me in a way like nothing else had or ever has done. In terms of, okay, that's what I really want to achieve in life. That's a way to really validate and prove myself that I am good enough, but also just seeing the pictures, the feeling of being one of those people, to have been there in that position. Just, I wanted that more than anything. And I guess my biggest underlying fear was that without that, I was never going to be happy and content in life. And I think we're all sold this illusion, that it's like we always want the next big thing, whether that's the mountain or whether that's the job or the car or the house and all those things that we see as success. And for me, Everest kind of just symbolizes that ultimate peak of where we want to be in life. I think what I learned is actually Everest wasn't the end goal. It was actually a step towards it. And it was just another expression of that sense of success. And what really helped me was going to Tibet in 2016. So I tried to climb the 6th highest peak in the world, which is called Cho Oyu. Surprise, surprise, I didn't summit that either. I got to 7,200 meters approximately, which is just above Camp 2. I didn't get much beyond Camp 2 at all. The reason for going back to that peak was to try and put these demons to bed. It was my best chance of climbing an 8,000 meter peak in terms of it's probably the easiest 8,000 meter peak, but it's still 8,201 meters. But also to get more experience, to give me a better chance for going back to Everest one day with a view of going back in 2017. And I didn't summit because of altitude. I got quite badly ill at Camp 2, had to turn around very quickly after leaving Camp 2 with high altitude cerebral edema. And I remember lying there in my tent thinking like, what am I doing here? And thinking and remembering of that tent on Everest the year before, buried under a foot of rock and snow and ice at base camp that we'd left just that morning. And had we not left base camp, quite a few of us most likely would not have made it. We would have been in our tents having lunch, and that tent was thrown, into the next camp by the force of the blast. And it was this sensation of like, what would I have left behind had I been there? Like, what was it all for? I was kind of having a midlife crisis at like 21 years old, And then on the way home, I was one of only 2 people in the team who didn't summit. So it was not a nice atmosphere, really. And Tibet is a fascinating but very weird place. And we saw Everest on the horizon. We were driving back to Lhasa, and I remember like the minibus pulling up, and we could see Everest across the Tibetan plateau, and it's really prominent from the north side. It's an amazing view. It's very different to what is in Nepal. Very, very barren. But you can see this big white rock sticking out of the ground. I remember looking at it, and unlike the first time I'd seen it, there was no sense of like calling anymore. The goosebumps that I felt weren't there. There was just a sense of like emptiness. Like, what have I got to prove? I've got nothing to prove anymore. And I think that was when I realized actually, Everest is not the only summit. And interestingly, that became the subtitle for my second book, because there is always like another peak. There's always another challenge to climb. And ultimately, I realized that even if I had summited Everest, I wouldn't be satisfied. I need something else. And I saw some of my teammates who went back to Everest and summited eventually, and they still had this sense of like an itch, And that's when I realized actually for me, that sense of inspiration and trying to create a legacy and giving something back is so much more rewarding. And that's really what it's all ties down to. Everest was a step towards achieving that. But ultimately, when I accepted that, I found this sense of closure that I never thought I'd find. And as you say, I've been looking for new Everest since then. Something that is that one big, almost insurmountable goal. And there's been smaller ones. Nothing has been quite as big and demanding, but I've got some plans for this year, which I hope will achieve that. But I think when you realize that one big thing is not going to fix anything, it wasn't going to fix my depression. It wasn't going to, make me feel validated. That's got to come from inside. That was a really profound moment for me, I think.
challenging ourselves and adventuring is so deeply personal within the individual. And so many of us have our own Everests in life that we take on. For some people, it could be, running their first ultra and, going on a training plan, could be doing a long distance swim, which I've done in the past of, where I felt really foreign going out into open water and, having to build that confidence and get the training in to accomplish that. For others, it could just be going for a 5 kilometer run or just getting outside that day, when they have to like balance, childcare and, other things in their life and work. So it's a real good reminder that how to make something personal to you and not worry about what everyone else is doing. What are the goals that seem like they are advertised to us as like the pinnacle? Everest is just the highest mountain in the world, which doesn't necessarily mean it's the toughest challenge for any of us. So it's just a great reminder that, to understand that yourself and what is going to be a challenge and an adventure for you, and to believe in yourself and to have the confidence to know that I'm not going to compare myself to others in what I choose to do. When I set myself a goal, it's understanding that goal has to be very personal to me, and I know what it's going to feel like to be out of that comfort zone.
Yeah. And Everest is the highest, but we know it's not the hardest in terms of the 8,000 meter peaks. It's kind of fairly straightforward, especially if you look at the success rate of other peaks, K2 being one of those, and Manaslu and, Annapurna and all the others. Like it's by far not the hardest, for sure. And for me, when I'm looking for challenges now, I often have a criteria, and I do get a real kick from chasing times and records, because it's uncharted territory. I kind of like doing things that haven't been done before. I'm not so interested in doing races anymore. I say that, and I've got Grisdale Marathon on Sunday, but I like them as a bit of a mini fitness test, and also as short-term goals. They're a good motivator in between the really, really big projects, which obviously aren't practical to do all the time because of life and other stuff and time and cost and health and various other factors. I'm not interested in races because for me, they're a bit too predictable, and I really want to be racing myself. I want to be racing the unknown and not just in a big crowd of people. The outdoors for me as a teenager became a way of really finding myself. That very first hill walk in the Lake District at 14 was that spark for me. And it became myself versus the environment. And that was where I built the confidence and the drive and the achievement and the worth from, is that fact it was kind of me versus the environment. And it's still very much a solitary thing. Like I'm on my own in the mountains probably 90% of the time, because it's very much that personal space. That's how I express myself. The challenge I've got is like that expression for me is really key to my identity, and to an extent, my career and the charity all kind of depend on me doing these things. I don't just want to be somebody talking about something I did 10 years ago. I mean, Everest is 10 years ago, which is kind of terrifying. I feel really old now. So I feel like I have to stay true to myself. I have to keep challenging myself. But as you say, it's relative. Like, I was chatting to somebody about this only this week. When I started running, my dad was a big runner. He got me into that. He'd done London Marathon a few times. He was my inspiration to start running. My stepmom put a €2 bet that I couldn't run a mile with my dad. And I was 13. When you're 13, you know, €2 is a lot of money back then. And that's what started me running. I then entered a 10K race. And at that point, doing anything beyond that felt impossible. Like, I can't do that. Doing a marathon felt like, I'll probably like drop dead or something. And then you do a marathon, and then you just incrementally raise the bar a little bit higher, and your confidence grows accordingly. And then, I thought I could never do 100 miles. And then I'm doing 100 miles. And then, what's next? So I say to people, like, where you are right now has no resemblance on where you might be in a few years' time. But equally, like for me, I'm in my element, running on my own in the mountains in bad weather or on a stage in front of 500 people. Put me in a bar full of strangers or in a nightclub. If that's my challenge, like I would rather run a mile and hide under a table, especially having a stammer. That's my worst nightmare. Because I'm not confident in that environment. So as you say, it has to be relevant to you and something that's going to challenge you. And people often say, oh yeah, it's nothing big by your standards, but that doesn't matter because I've been doing this for a long time, and I see people that I think, well, I could never do that. They're a new level. And I think if you're doing challenges to, compare yourselves or to match up or get that validation from other people, it's not a sustainable source of motivation. It's got to come from inside. And it's good to use people as a benchmark, use them as a benchmark, a bit of healthy competition for sure. But I'm not an elite runner. I'm never going to be because there are so many other things that I could do that I think would make a bigger difference to people than just entering race after race after race. So that's kind of where I'm at the moment, really.
Just jumping in briefly to say, if you've got this far, you're probably a fan of the show. And it would be great if you wouldn't mind confirming that love by following or subscribing to this podcast. It takes just one click from you, but it really does make a huge difference in getting more people to find this show. Thank you. One of the things that you've, one of your more local challenges that you've taken on, which didn't go to plan, was your coast to coast trail. Something that's very local to the north of England. It's kind of a very common route for hikers, but also for runners to do, going from, is it St Bees?
Yeah.
One way to
Robin Hood's Bay,
Yorkshire, yeah. Or which way did you do it?
St Bees.
St Bees, yeah.
Which is the common way, yeah.
Yeah. Talk us through the various attempts you made on that and what went wrong on each time.
So I mentioned I did a 100 miler on the Lake Smears Waters in 2022, which is my first 100 miler. And then I got long COVID for a year. So I was out for the best part of a year, which was probably the worst, toughest experience of my life, actually, because I had lost my identity. I wondered whether I'd ever get back to adventures and running again. But then I wanted to push that bar higher. And we had a campaign in the charity called Project 500, which is trying to raise £500,000 for our charity by June this year. Essentially to raise awareness of the fact that now, actually suicide is the biggest killer of people under 35 in the UK. And as somebody who's turning 30 this year, I wanted to mark that milestone by raising awareness of that. And if we can raise that much money, it will transform what we do and scale to reach thousands more people. So as part of that, as the charity founder, I thought, well, I need to really lead by example here. So I came up with like a series of challenges that I was going to do over the year and this year as well. And the first sort of step was to run the coast to coast. So there's a race called the Northern Traverse, which is every April. And that is running most of the coast to coast route. So 186 miles, I think, from St Bees across to North Yorkshire. So you go across, it's in the Lake District and the Yorkshire Dales and the North York Moors as well. Beautiful route, very popular. Most sensible people walk it over 2 weeks. The race I pulled out of a few weeks beforehand because of illness, and I'm really glad I did, because as it happens, I got COVID the weekend of the race, so I wouldn't have been able to do it anyway. And had I tried to run with COVID in my system, I did not want to end up with another year of post-viral fatigue. Thank you very much. So that worked out for the best. And then I decided, well, if I can't do the race, I'll just go and do the route myself. So I built a team and attempted it in July to essentially follow the race route, follow it as if I was in the race, except it's only me and my support runners in the checkpoints. And it was nerve-wracking because I had a target of 60 hours, which I kind of felt was about right. It's not elite level, but it's still kind of mid-pack. And it went really well. It started fantastically. Everything was great. It was a mad time. Like, I think that weekend before, I'd done I've been in a conference speaking in the Netherlands. I've been speaking for loads of corporates. I had a conference the day before in the Northeast, and then for a high school in Carlisle. Then the next morning I was on the start line. So it was the craziest week of my life.
And are you sleeping in these 60 hours?
So the idea of a 60-hour run is very much power naps. My strategy was that I would have power naps.
How long for?
Because it was new to me, I was kind of experimenting, but the plan was that I was going to have like, half an hour, maybe a couple of hours at certain checkpoints. And it was on the first day. So after 21 and a half hours, I got to Kirkby Stephen, which is 78 miles. That was my first planned sleep. So I was going to have half an hour in the van before I carried on. And that was from speaking to a lot of other runners, learning from them and trying to work out what is kind of normal. I think some people do very less, and it's so different. Some people will literally have 15 minutes for the duration.
And that's going by the fact that you just think that you're going to lay down and sleep.
Yeah, but often you sometimes can't.
Yeah.
But then what happened was I got into Kirkby about half an hour early. So I thought, well, no, I still need half an hour. I'm starting to feel really, really sleepy now. Because you have to go on how you feel as well. And try and sleep when it's dark, if possible, to kind of keep your body, keep your body clock in sync. So as I mentioned before, it was all fine. I had half an hour, but then I woke up and I didn't feel very good. I didn't feel refreshed in the slightest, which is not surprising given I've been running for 21 and a half hours.
Yeah.
And I remember feeling very cold, feeling a bit sick. I started to put my shoes on, have porridge, have coffee. I'd been lying down in the support van for a bit. And then next thing I started feeling very kind of faint and lightheaded. So I just laid back down again thinking, I just need to let this pass. Maybe I've just got up too quick or something. And the next thing, I didn't really know what was happening. I just remember waking up, sort of kind of, half conscious, not really aware of what was going on, hearing voices around me, the ground spinning. There's this sense of like being trapped until I came round, and then my friend Ben, who was due to run the next leg with me, he just said, I've had a seizure. And I thought, what? Like, I didn't know what had happened to me. You're not really aware of what's happening. And then I remember like coming around a little bit. I was lying on the bed. They'd had to sort of hold me on the bed so I didn't fall off with all the shaking. And then I felt awful, So I just said to Harry, I said like, yeah, call an ambulance because this is not meant to happen. Fainting isn't necessarily a bad thing in a run, depending on what's caused it, because it can be a lot of factors. But a seizure was like, this is off. And then I started feeling very faint again. My heart was pounding. I literally thought I was having a heart attack. I thought I was going to die, basically, again, because the whole van was spinning around me. So that was a trip to Lancaster Hospital. Luckily, they couldn't find any cause. They thought it was electrolyte imbalance, possibly, but there was no cause, basically. So, yeah, that was not anything I expected to happen, especially not triggered by an ultra. I'm very grateful it happened when it did in the van with Ben and Harriet there to support me, but I think it scared the lights out of them, to be honest, and they were amazing. But then it was a case of, right, I need to plan another attempt, otherwise I'm never going to get back on the wagon. So over the next 6 weeks, it was like, right, trying to learn as much as I can. What went wrong? How do I learn from it? How do I improve? How do I stop it happening again? So I spoke to my doctor, Rebecca, then spoke to a consultant neurologist at a place in Manchester who had been suggested by him. I spoke to my coach, spoke to other people, including Gemma, my friend, who's a nurse and she's a medic on these things, so she's seen a lot of this before. And I really tried to crack what had happened. The problem is I then, because of epilepsy, they assumed it was that again. So I started on medication. Obviously now I can't drive. And it felt like a bit of a backward step. It's like, I've been here before. But then I thought, hang on a minute, epilepsy hasn't stopped me in 17 years and it's not going to stop me now. So I set another date. Within a week, I set a date for take 2, whilst it was still summer holidays and whilst it was still fairly warm.
How did you ensure that this one would be different? this one would you'd not encounter the same problem you had?
To an extent, you can never guarantee anything. That's adventure. But I was on medication, which was a massive protective factor. I got reassurance from this neurologist that I was fine to go again, as long as I had people there, which of course I did. I had support people all the way there. And some people did say to me, is this sensible? I said, well, it was never really sensible to begin with, But lots of little things, like what we felt it was caused by was actually, it was a reflex anoxic seizure. So basically triggered by the drop in blood pressure. So being tall and thin makes me very prone to that. I've got very low, actually, my blood pressure is very low anyway. And so I was wearing calf sleeves all the time, which helps to prevent that. Every time I stopped, my legs were going straight up against a chair, trying to kind of stop that kind of blood pooling. The hydration, the electrolytes are my biggest worry, because I thought that was the cause of it. So I then saw a nutritionist, sports dietitian, Catherine, who helped me to really kind of crack the whole hydration, getting enough electrolytes thing. And yeah, I was nervous. I think my family were nervous. My dad was part of my support crew, and when I hugged him at the start, you could see he was really proud, but really, really nervous. I think everybody was for me. But for me, the biggest risk would have been not going back out there. So I went back in mid-August, and I had a great team again. It all started well. The conditions were fine. But this time, something was off from the very start. Like, I had lost my appetite within the first hour. I was having stomach issues. So for the benefit of the guests, I'm not going to go into those. But it wasn't pleasant. I felt drained. I was having stomach issues every time I ate anything. I had to force the food down. And that was from quite early on. So either I wasn't recovered in time, it could have been the medication, it could have just been one of those bad days, it could have been a bug, I have no idea. But it was doomed from the start. And by the first night, I was falling asleep, which is not normal. I shouldn't have been falling asleep within 12 hours. On the way to Shap, I would just have to literally say, I need 10 minutes just to lie in the field. And that's what happens when you sleep these things. You have a sudden wave of tiredness. You just need to lie down in the field for 10 minutes. And then you almost recharge your batteries for about another hour or two, and then you carry on. But I got past Kirkby Stephen. I said, I've got to at least get past Kirkby Stephen without having another fit. And that was the big nervous, my biggest fear was getting past Kirkby Stephen. But I was really nervous about having long sleeps because of what happened. So my plan this time was to have a lot more short sleeps, and also to, elevate my feet, to try and stop that kind of drop. So I changed a lot of things, but I think something went wrong from the start. I think I just wasn't ready. And the second night I was having hallucinations.
And it would be so hard to kind of admit that to yourself at the time, to understand that, you probably didn't feel like you were in the right place to take this on. But you've, built this up over months, and you've got all these people together. Yeah. This is the one place and one time that you can do this. So you're trying to work out how far can I actually, how much of this is just me, trying to overcome what my body's like, trying to, it's been wired differently, but how can I rewire it to be like, okay, I can do this. Despite what you're feeling, I can push further. But ultimately, there's like a limit to how much you can do that, but actually you realize that your body is in a certain state that's just not prepared, not necessarily prepared, it's not performing at its optimum.
Yeah. And that's kind of the catch with nowadays, is that, to raise money for a charity, to do something for a cause, you've got to do the social media side of it. You've got to talk about it. You've got to promote it. There is a real call to do adventures just for yourself, just to enjoy it for what it used to be before social media was a real thing. And because of that, when you start having to build a support team and people are very generously giving their time to support you, you have to kind of set a date, because you've got to plan around that. You don't really have the flexibility. When you're, as you say, when you're doing a build up on social media, you've got kind of that one chance, and people say, don't go if you're not ready, there's always another day, that classic line, which I have to admit is one of my least favorite sayings, that is the mountain will always be there. But people don't realize actually how much goes into that one chance at the mountain. And, moving it a day can actually be a massive, massive headache. So you kind of have to just give yourself the best chance on the day it comes and hope that everything comes together. But I think, obviously, I had the training. I had 6 weeks of recovery. I had a week in Barcelona to try and recover. But that's after 78 miles and a seizure. Having a seizure can also be very exhausting on the body as well. It potentially wasn't enough. And there's so many variables in ultra running. I think it could have been the fueling, and drinking too much plain water as well was probably my mistake the second time. But that's the thing, you almost have to draw a date in the sand and go for it. And it's on that second time, there was an element of wanting to, I had to at least improve on the last time. I wanted to defy that barrier. And if anything, it was more about, I think in hindsight, it was more about getting back out there and proving to myself that I was okay, rather than necessarily finishing it. Of course, I wanted to finish it and I was adamant on finishing it. And that's why I pushed myself as far as I did. I mean, I got to 124 miles, 44 hours, longer than I've ever ran before. The second night was spicy. I was like hallucinating. It was mad. It was fun, but it was mad. And that second night, I reached a point of, okay, this is getting scary, like in terms of the symptoms, the lack of ability to eat, the dehydration, the fueling. I knew that it was going to take me another day to finish, and I was already well behind schedule. So my support crew weren't going to be there as much. And I think if I'd carried on, I would have put myself into serious damage. So it was the right decision. But of course, I was just gutted to have to make it again.
What happened at the point when you felt that you could no longer continue? What stopped you there?
It just took me hours and hours to make my mind up. I just tried to get advice. I spoke to Catherine, the dietitian, Gemma, my friend again, who has been a medic on these things, who's seen it before. I was just trying to kind of problem solve. I was speaking to my coach as well. There was lots of WhatsApp messages going all over the place. I was in the van, and I was in and out of sleep. Like, I think Harriet said to me, my partner, she was like talking to me, and then all of a sudden, mid-sentence, I just feel like, I just literally fall asleep. And then I woke up and I was like sleep talking, and I think that scared the hell out of her, to be honest. But I was worried that I was low on salt. But then I was worried that I was having too much salt. So it's like, well, do I drink? Do I not drink? Do I eat? Do I not eat? And given what had happened before, I was worried about the same thing happening again. So I agreed with Rich, my friend who was there as my support crew, and Harriet, that I would go back to where I'd finished. So I went to meet them in the village hall when I said I need like a proper sleep in the van for an hour, which I did. I went back to where I'd sort of stopped that night. And I said, I'll walk a mile, see how I feel. And even walking on a flat road with the blisters, with the dehydration, I said, this is not going to happen. And I said, at least I know I've been there and I've tried. And I walked, and I couldn't even sustain a run on a flat tarmac road with like 61 miles of the North York Moors still to go. I just said, this isn't going to happen. And actually, I'm so far off my goal now that I've lost the incentive to carry on. So it was more from a fear of what would happen, and fear did guide my decision. And I felt really trapped. It wasn't so much I didn't want to carry on. It was like the case of, I'm going to do serious harm if I carry on. And it was the right decision at the time. But yeah, there were tears. There was just a sense of despair. Like, I can't believe this has happened again. That's it. I'm done. But when you're that tired, obviously, you're not going to be very resilient. You're not going to be very positive initially. That comes in the days and the weeks afterwards. But we went home. We had a long drive back home.
Do you think so much of this it was in your own head as well? You were still trying to overcome, rewire your mind and push your body to go against what, in the position that it actually was in at the time. Perhaps people around you probably could see that this wasn't going to happen, but they can't tell you that. You need to kind of come to terms with it yourself. So that long time of you, were those people around you like kind of seeing this and being like, well, we're doubting him, but we're going to let him, see where he goes.
It's really hard for the team because like that's where you're going to have people that know you well. And like Rich, my good friend, he's been involved in a lot of my challenges and he's seen me at my very worst and at my best. And he's not afraid to have those honest chats. And afterwards I spoke to them and said, did you really think I was going to make it? And they said no. But nobody wants to be the person to say that, and I think they were definitely worried. I think my parents were, and and Harriet was really, really worried about, because I was adamant of kind of carrying on the state I was in, and the symptoms I was having. They were really, really worried about me carrying on. But the rest of the team on WhatsApp, who perhaps weren't there, my support runners that had either been with me or were going to be with me, they were trying to get me to carry on. They were saying, we'll be there regardless. They were trying to not give me a way to escape, really. But ultimately, it has to come from me, and often I'm very, very stubborn. I don't quit easily. But there have been times when that team around me are the ones that have got me to carry on. And I've been so grateful for that. And that's why they're there. That's why you need the team around you. But ultimately, you've got to want it yourself. And at that point, I was in too bad a state. Just, diarrhea and dehydration with another 24 hours could end pretty badly, And so you need those people that really believe in you, but they can tell the difference. I think it's a very, very fickle difference. You've got to ignore social media because the people on there are going to tell you, oh, it's fine, you've done really well. They'll give you a way to quit. You need the people to give you the harsh truth, to tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. And the way I've always justified it in my head is, would I have a reason that I'm happy to share? Would I be proud of that reason? Okay, so if I gave up because I was a bit tired, because I didn't feel very well, that for me feels like a bit of an excuse. If it's forced out of my control, I'm happy to put my hand up and admit that. That's always my criteria.
You walked away from this coast-to-coast journey.
Or hobbled away.
A broken man for the second time. Knowing that this thing that you thought you could do within, a weekend had lasted months and 2 attempts, and you still hadn't completed it. Was there a burning desire to return?
It certainly dragged on longer than I wanted. I mean, I thought I'd have it boxed off by July and then I'd have time to go and do another challenge or another 2 challenges. That wasn't the case. I remember saying after the second attempt, when we drove home in the van, when I hobbled into the house, I was a mess. The blisters, everything was just... Getting in the bath was actually agonizing because of all the blisters everywhere. I felt so wrecked. I lost my appetite as well, which is very unlike me. And that's why I think I was ill from the start, because that's not normal. There was no real sense of achievement. There was relief, but relief is overweighed by disappointment. I remember saying to Harriet, I'm done. I'm just done with this. Especially when I went in the hospital, I was like, right, this is a shave too far. This is too close. This is my warning sign. If I don't listen to it, it's going to be worse. That was before I knew the full picture. But the second time, it's like, right, I need a break. So I took a month off running. I then went back to do the Seven Valleys Ultra, which is 110k around the Lake District to the end of September. So yeah, I had a few weeks off, and we went in the van that weekend after that, just to be in the lakes, just to be out in the mountains without any pressure, without any rush, just to try and process it all. I then got really busy with speaking, so I was kind of distracted by that anyway, talking about it, but not really doing the adventures. And then the Seven Valleys Ultra was like my first big race back. So I'd done essentially 300k plus runs within the space of 3 months, which is quite a lot. And that race went okay. I mean, I got 4th, but I was an hour slower than the year before. But what that did give me was that confidence, kind of just to get back in the arena. but I had no desire to go back and do the whole thing, especially because I'd seen the first bit twice already. But I then had the plan that I'd go back and run the final 60 miles, bit basically from where I finished last time to the end. I think just to get it off my mind, to get kind of Robin Hood's Bay that I've been visualizing for months and months and months. When I had those runs, I had the end in mind the whole way. I just wanted to get there, to have that moment. Okay, it wasn't what I set out to do. And all the purists will come after me in a burning mob, if I tell them I finished it, because I didn't finish it. My challenge was to run 186 miles.
No, but you did.
I completed the route.
Exactly. No.
Yeah.
And that is the goal.
The goal for me, I think, was to run 186 miles in one go.
Okay. Well, I'm going to argue that you did. It just took you months.
It was my slowest known time. Yeah, it was my slowest known time.
But isn't that fine? Isn't that fine to admit? And some people, there'll always be a faster time or someone who can do it faster than you.
Yeah.
Okay, you've done it, much, much slower than, what people can do in like a weekend. But you still, your feet have still
they've done
carved that route.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think in the ultra running community, it can often be very focused on FKTs and records. And I'm not, I don't do this to be part of a cult. I just do this to challenge myself to be better and to inspire other people. And for me, it very much is about the journey. It is about picking myself back up, getting back in the arena. This coast to coast has given me a fair bit of grief if I think back to my license and, the hospital visits and the anxiety and all the grief that comes with that whole process of before, during, and after. It would have been easy just to give up on the first attempt, to not ever do these things again. And there is an itch to go and run the distance, because I know I'm capable of doing it. But when you start messing about, risking your health, that for me gets me in a very uncomfortable position. And that's going to take some work on. So there's an itch, but towards the end of the year, it's like my body will not handle another attempt at the whole thing. Especially not after the ultra, because I just got in a position of like, I stopped enjoying running. I was getting niggles and injuries and I just wasn't recovering at all. So I thought, I've kind of burnt myself out here. So I thought, I want to have a fresh start in this year, to go into much bigger things, but I want to get this thing out of my system. So I decided at the end of December, the 21st, the shortest day of the year, I was going to go back and finish the final bit. And that for me is said, it's not about running the full distance. I haven't still achieved my goal, but I think what people relate to is the journey. The fact that I went back out there and did it. And I'm most proud of that, because I said it would have been easy just to call it quits, and I still got to see all the bits of the journey that I was looking forward to. And that's kind of my style. I'm very much the underdog. I'm never going to be an elite, and that's fine, because that's where I want to be.
So, I have this thing about adventure and about the balance between pushing ourselves physically, but still being in a place to enjoy the journey. And from so many of my various cycle tours of differing lengths, the ones that I've enjoyed the most is when I've cycled the least, because I've been able to enjoy the world that I'm passing through.
Mm-hmm.
And so I suppose what I want to say is it's fine to have a balance between not doing something that's going to be the detriment to your health, that's going to push you beyond a point where you're going to enjoy it. But also it is great to celebrate what the human body is capable of. And that's what doing these challenges in a short amount of time can do. But also, the coast to coast route could be lovely if done over a week or two, walking it and taking it slow and being able to appreciate the land you're passing through at a pace which allows you to appreciate that. I'm just curious what your thoughts are between the kind of, you say you didn't complete the route, but you did. It just took you longer. And it's no different for someone who, did it over 2 weeks. You just did it over a few months. What are your thoughts about the balance between pushing yourself but also, enjoying it at the time?
I mean, I'm very motivated by performance. So for me, I get the kick from going fast. But I get that real paradox, because when I think of Climb the UK, which is basically my post-Everest challenge, I decided to climb all of the 100 county tops in the UK. So cycling, walking, running, kayaking, nearly 5,000 miles in 72 days. And that was a real example of this, because I almost set this target of 72 days. I was going to be the fastest person to climb them all, especially in this kind of human-powered effort. And there were many, many parts of that. And I remember writing about this in my book as well. Like, I really wanted to stop, because cycling for me is all about the cake and the coffee, right? What's the point otherwise? And it was a sense of like, I wanted to stop. But I couldn't, because I was always on a schedule. I was rushing A to B, because I had an agenda. I had accommodation booked. I had ferries to catch. I had somewhere to be, and I didn't want to fall behind. I could have done it in a lot slower time and had more chance to really experience the places and the people. But almost for me, that doesn't excite me. And to be able to raise money, I think you've got to do something that is more challenging, I found, or at least relative to what I've done before. And also from a time perspective, like when I'm doing these challenges, I'm not speaking, therefore I'm not making an income. So I have to have a bit of a time constraint. But I think there is space for both, but if I'm doing a big challenge in terms of what I'm known for in the adventure world, those things, the big public things, are generally very challenging, but the adventure where I can enjoy it is more for myself. I do that on my own time. When I think of somebody like Sean Conway and his 105, 105, it's just
iron distance triathlons.
Yeah, which is just phenomenal, and like a massive inspiration. And Mark Beaumont again, and another big inspiration. When he's cycling around the world in 78 days, like that's kind of the world I'm interested in. Is that like performance type adventure, and that's where I want to be. But equally, when I'm on a day-to-day basis, I'm not doing those things all the time. I love just being out in the hills for hours on my own, just to explore and just to be. And I mentioned before about getting into in open water swimming. When I had long COVID, I couldn't run for a long time. My body would just crash. So what I could do in that time, what really got me through it, was open water swimming, because my body didn't seem to have that same reaction, because I'm not pushing myself. I'm just kind of in the moment. That was such a new perspective for me, because for the first time, I wasn't looking at my watch. I wasn't racing through the environment. I was actually like in the middle of it, just in the middle of a lake, just looking around you at the mountains and the sunset, and just feeling like at one, and a sense of not having an agenda, not having to push myself. And that was really profound for me. And I still try to factor those things in, but generally, because I'm busy, I have to almost get the biggest bang for my buck in terms of my time outside. And generally it's because I'm training for something. But I do have other trips and other travel where I'm doing it because I want to, for fun, and enjoying those moments, stopping in a cafe afterwards. And after a challenge, that's when I tend to do that. I tend to just go and do what I feel like doing, which might be, going for a little bike ride to a bakery or something, and just enjoying the slow life.
Okay. Yeah, I get you. I think it's actually a really good thing to highlight is make sure you enjoy the training, because that's when you don't have to push yourself. Because if you do, you might end up with injury or being ill.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's where you have to be. You have to build slowly. So you may as well enjoy that journey, enjoy being outside, enjoy going to visiting great cafes and eating good cake. And yeah, you are time pushed in this modern world of what you can achieve. And yes, you do have to raise money for your charity, Mind Over Mountains. So let's talk about that. What inspired you to set this up?
The inspiration came from personal experiences, like a lot of charities do. An event happens and people create something to respond to that event or that need. And since I found the outdoors when I was about 14, that became a real antidote to the anxiety that I had as a child, and very much a coping tool, and When I had my first bout of depression when I was 16, I got into running, and that's when I really took it seriously, and that helped me to cope with that. It didn't cure anything, but I don't know where I would have been without it. And when I came back from Everest, there was obviously a lot of trauma. That triggered an eating disorder as well, which I've had on and off since I was 16 when I was injured. And so I'd always dealt with it using the outdoors. And what really struck me from when I did a climb in the UK in 2017 for Young Minds, which is the leading mental health charity for young people, was that it took me longer to get an appointment than it did to cycle, walk and run 5,000 miles around the country, which clearly isn't good enough.
How long did it take you to get the appointment?
It was a few months. I can't remember exactly because would have been...
And how long did it take you to cycle?
72 days. So yeah, you're looking at like 3 months from initial appointment to actually starting therapy. And that isn't a complaint. It's more a realization of the demand and on services and the lack of resource available. Now, I was fortunate that I felt able to kind of self-medicate, through the outdoors, and that got me through the worst times. But then I thought, well, what about everyone that hasn't got that? And so one thing that came off the back of climbing the UK was that I started to talk. Well, before doing the challenge, I started talking more openly, like for the first time. Like I'd always spoken a little bit about anxiety, but I didn't really talk about the eating disorder. I didn't talk about, the depression openly, because there was always this sense of like, well, I'm the adventurer, I'm the athlete, I'm this mentally tough person. And when I started talking about it, it almost opened this, what I call the kind of positive multiplier effect, where other people felt able to join in, to talk about it. And you start this conversation, and it makes people more able to talk about these things and to get the help that they need, and to realize actually it's not just me, it's nothing wrong with me. And so because of that, I then got an email from a group called Adventure Uncovered. And I remember we met for a coffee in London. They had this idea, they wanted to do this event around hill walking and mental health. So they asked whether I could help as like an ambassador type figure. And naturally, like being a bit of a perfectionist, I threw myself into it. I wanted to make it as big as it could be, but I wanted it to not just be like a weekend away, because we all know that helps. The problem is you have to keep on doing it. It's not really sustainable. So how can you give people, the tools to stay well on a day-to-day basis when they're not in the mountains in a retreat? So I called Chris, my own coach and mentor, and asked if he could help the group in the same way that he'd helped me with Everest and everything else. And we kind of designed this weekend retreat of hill walking, coaching, counseling, mindfulness, and inspirational speakers. And it was just 2 days in May 2018 of reconnecting with like-minded people, no Wi-Fi, no phone signal. People just have to talk to each other, and just being out in the healing power of the mountains. And so we were so blown away by the impact that weekend had that we decided to then start a charity so that we could take this to more people. So we did the same event again in 2019. We then started to register as a charity, and then that thing happened in March 2020. So obviously everything got cancelled. But with a name like ours, we couldn't just do nothing when we're in probably one of the most isolating times of our lives, when people were struggling more than ever before. So we adapted, we kind of condensed this weekend into a 1-day walk. And, nearly 5 years on, we now deliver these walks and retreats all across England and Wales. And the team has grown, and we help hundreds of people each year.
And what kind of people do you work with, and kind of what stories do you have about kind of how they've been transformed through the work that you offer them?
We work with a real range of people, anybody over 18, and it's everybody from, single parents to police officers to paramedics to entrepreneurs, to university students, to even people that are in the old, they're in, later stages of their lives, where perhaps they're not as mobile or as fit as they used to be, and maybe they've lost confidence, so they've not walked for a very long time. And it's very broad, that's what we see. And there's lots of stories. I mean, I've not been on the events myself much the last 2 years, just because it's probably not the best use of my time. And we have a brilliant team now who run the thing. And I'm not a qualified coach or anything yet. I focus on the fundraising. But when I have been on them and what I've heard from them, I remember one guy in particular, Matt, who came on one of our retreats in the police. And I remember him saying to us afterwards that was like the best weekend of his life. And he then went and did his very first marathon where he lives. He'd never even walked that distance before, but he went and completed his very first marathon to raise money for us in return, because he said like how much it helped him, and he wanted other people to have the same benefit. And the quotes and the emails we get from people, speak for themselves. I remember we took a lady up, I think it was in Everest in Snowdonia, and she was so beaming. It was her first ever mountain, and she was, I think, in her late 50s. And she was so buzzing about that. She was literally telling everybody on the way down that she climbed that mountain, and she wanted a t-shirt saying, "I climbed a mountain." And that confidence then meant she kept coming back on more and more walks. I went on one retreat we did for a group of asylum seekers and forced migrants and refugees in Snowdonia. And I remember there was this one lady who just kept stopping, putting her arms out, feeling that wind, sunshine, freedom, just closing her eyes and feeling that thing around her. And just because that was like something she'd never felt before. And it just really gave me goosebumps. It made me think, like, how often do we take that for granted? That we can go and stand on a hill and there's people that have never had that experience before. The fact that a lot of these people come back to our retreats, they actually refer to it, as a top up. Like they need their kind of, their kind of Mitre Mountains kind of top up. Speaks for itself, because people see it as like a therapeutic intervention. A lot of stories I can't share because of confidentiality. But there are so many in the last 5 years that it's really hard to pick one. But those are a few that kind of stand out to me. And one chap who came on our very, very first event back in 2020, it came at a time when he was really struggling with his business closing down. He just lost his dog. He was in a real state of transition. And that weekend and being with our team gave him the clarity of what he really wanted and what he didn't want. And he then actually ended up training as a counsellor himself, and is now a counsellor helping many more people. So I see that as like this more multiplier effect. You've got more people that are helping more people. And if people then go on and feel obliged to want to then do fundraisers for us or volunteer for us, that for me says everything we need to know.
It's it just sounds so simple, especially maybe people listen to this, or people like yourselves and people like you and I, who perhaps do have the privilege of being given access to the outdoors when we were younger and discovering that, just standing on a mountain does wonders to our own mental health and physical well-being. But it's hard to forget that sometimes access to the mountains is actually what can stop people ever realizing that is there for them. And it's just almost a reminder of how important it is to give access to all, to something which to us seems very simple. Just go and walk up a hill because we're very familiar with that. But for many people, it isn't.
Yeah, it's alien to a lot of people. And I fully respect the privilege that we have. And, I don't want to oversimplify it. What we do on the events is a lot more than just walking. It's that combination of professional mental health support, with coaches, counsellors and psychotherapists whilst in the open environment. But on a day-to-day basis, when I'm in London, I'm reminded of this, and we're never far from green space, but okay, a park in London is maybe not the same as being in the Brecon Beacons, for example. We can still get a lot of the same benefits, but I think it is very much a case of culture. And like a lot of people just don't think to go up a mountain. They wouldn't even want to do that. They're probably not even aware it's there. And what we realize is, as a charity, we need to go into places to the people that aren't doing it. There's no point preaching to the converted. We get it, but what about the people that don't? who could probably benefit a lot more. And those people are often the ones that are perhaps more susceptible to, mental or physical health problems as well. The pandemic was a great example of that. When people are stuck in tower blocks, when we've got like an hour of exercise a day. I mean, for me, being able to run up a hill was a sense of normality against all that chaos at the time. So we are doing pilot projects with different communities, especially near big urban areas, to make more accessible walks, and trying to take people out of their local areas to find these spaces. So that it becomes a way of life for them. So they see that as a daily or a weekly, habit and routine. It doesn't have to be climbing the big mountains. Just getting into nature as a habit. It's often about a mindset shift, but then it's breaking down other barriers. It's kit, it's accessibility, it's diversity. People need to see other people like them doing these things. So that's the kind of conversations that we're having at the moment.
You talked a lot about all the speaking that you do. And for someone who grew up with a stammer, it's incredible to see you kind of overcome that adversity and build your confidence to be on a stage and be very comfortable doing that. What are the key things that you hear people take away from your story after you speak with them, after you've been on stage?
I would just caveat that the stammer is still very much there, and I still struggle with it every day. And I was saying before, I was at a networking meeting and I go up to people and try and say hello, and I get a complete block. So they're like, do you want to talk to this person? And I'm like, frozen. And inside I've got this internal humiliation and panic, but I'm just used to it now. So still an ongoing struggle. But on stage, for some reason, seems a lot more comfortable and fluid than a one-to-one conversation. What people often say to me, it often comes to me either in messages afterwards on social media, or people will come to me quietly afterwards and have a chat. People say that it puts things in perspective. Like they realized that they were complaining about something in their life and actually maybe it wasn't that bad. And it gave them a perception in terms of what's important. A lot of people relate to the bullying thing, the lack of confidence, that imposter syndrome. And it just think they feel like it wasn't only them, and that sense of openness in case of, okay, well, if he can overcome all that and do that, people often say to me, well, it's made me think about my challenges and what I can do. And I want to do that thing that I've been putting off. The best thing I think has been said is when people relate to the mental health side of it. People think actually like I really related to that. And I've not been talking about this for a long time, but actually, because of you, I have gone and had a conversation with this, or I've reached out to so-and-so because you've made me realize that actually even the adventurers who look like they've got it all covered can still have these same challenges. And I have a long document which I save all the feedback and the quotes that I get from people. And so in my tired brain, it's hard to pull any particular ones out. But I think of one last summer. I did a talk at a high school, and it was not in Cumbria, so not too far from where I am. And afterwards, I got an email from one of the parents saying that her son had climbed his very first Wainwright Hill in the Lake District, because I'd inspired him to get out in the hills. And she sent me a picture of him on his first hill, and he said he wants to get them all done in the next year. And she said, thank you for inspiring him. Like, that's the best thing. This week, I had an order on my books from the parent of 2 kids who heard me at their school quite recently, and she said, like, since your talk, that's all they've been talking about. Like, what more do you need? Kids are the best because you're going to have a long-term impact on them. But I think what people often say is, because I'm quite young and there's not a lot of speakers that are my age, they say, oh, I see my kids in you, or you're younger than my kids. But I think what people say is it just makes them realize in terms of actually failure is not a bad thing. And people think, you know what, I've been putting off this thing for a while, and because of you, I want to go and do this. That's kind of the essence of it, really. You hear such a range because everyone relates in such different ways.
Your charity has the Project 500 you talked about to raise £500,000. Where is it at the moment? What state is it at in that fundraising?
Project 500 is not where I wanted it to be. We've raised about 150,000, and it was always the vision from the start that there was no way that I was going to raise that on my own. Unless you're a Love Island celebrity nowadays, it's really hard to raise that sort of money on social media. So it was always the vision that we would inspire and encourage our community to challenge themselves, to get outside, to boost their own well-being in the process. And we've been so lucky. We've had people doing amazing things, individuals, schools, universities, organizations, even like Samsung and Bupa were doing big walks for us last summer. We've had people running across India. We've had Dan doing his big rounds. We've had somebody doing like 10K a month. We had somebody climbing Everest on hill reps in a park in Sheffield. We had a guy who climbed Penny Fan every week of the year, so 52 times in a year. And actually, he came one of our early events in the Brecon Beacons, actually. And just to your point before around the comments, there was a group of people that joined our walk on Sugarloaf Mountain in the Brecon Beacons. And I was on that one, and I remember seeing this group of strangers looking very nervous in the car park, almost like, what on earth have I signed up to? At the end of the day, we're all exchanging numbers, and they then created their own Walk and Talk Wales group, where they built this community of friends. They meet up regularly, they go on days out, they go hill walking together, and almost that, creating that almost that kind of franchise of Mind Over Mountains type groups. And one of those members was the guy that did all the Penny Fan walks, which is amazing. The list goes on and on. If you look on our website, you can see just the range of what people are doing. And we had two guys kayaking the Yukon. Some really cool stuff. So because of those people, we've raised 150,000, which is still a pretty decent amount. I think it was just a massive target, and we need more people to join us. Everyone's done an amazing job to get to that point. And I'm hoping that my next challenges this summer can help us get closer to that. But I always had the vision with it that almost it's a massive goal, but if you set the bar high enough, you're gonna land high. Like, forgive me for using the quote, but almost, if you aim for the moon, you're at least gonna get further.
You end up on the stars. Yeah, that's the phrase. Yeah.
Yeah, aim for the stars, you'll end up on the moon.
I think it's aim for the moon, you end in the stars, I think.
Yeah, in principle, like if you set the bar high, even if you don't achieve the goal, you'll still land higher than you otherwise would have done. And the worst case scenario is we raise a lot of money. Therefore, we can't really lose. So at the moment, yeah, it's been amazing. But I think it's just been... It was ambitious, and I just think we have a lot of work to do still.
You are taking on your own challenge later on this year. You haven't announced details of it yet, so you can't talk too much deeply about it. But could you give an overview of what that might look like for yourself this coming summer?
I guess to give a teaser, it's going to be the hardest thing I've ever done.
It's going to be UK based.
All UK based. It's going to be an FKT, and it's going to involve... it's going to be entirely self-propelled, and it's going to involve quite a lot of different national parks. And it's going to take me a couple of months, probably more, to get round. So
sounds like a big adventure.
Yeah, I don't want to give too much away. I'm still shaping it. But I've always worked on the mantra that, if you can't go a week without thinking about something, then you probably need to do it. And this is something I wanted to do for a while. Life got in the way, and I hate using that phrase because it's my own choice, but long COVID obviously put a pause on things. And this feels like the right time. So yeah, the hardest part, as always, is just getting to the start line.
Okay. Let's just close things. Thank you very much for your time. I really enjoyed the conversation. I suppose in kind of the closing comments, you're very good at inspiring others through your talks and through social media. If anyone listening wants to take on an adventure but doubts themselves, what's your key piece of advice? What do you say to them?
I would say to accept that doubt is a necessary part of the equation, because if you were fully comfortable and confident doing something, then it wouldn't really be a big challenge. It's not going to really give you much in terms of growth or achievement. Like, you've got to feel a little bit of fear to be doing something worthwhile. So I'd say that's a good sign. Secondly, I think it would be easy to overthink it and to to quote my early coach, Chris, you don't need to know all the steps, just start and find the way. And I think thirdly, you've got to set the date. Like if you set a date, you have a deadline. If you wait for the right moment, you'll never do it. Just set the date and work it out as you go along. And it won't work out how you expect it to. Things will go wrong. It won't go to plan. But that for me is the journey. So you need that date for accountability. And if you're somebody that needs a bit of external motivation, put it on social media, create accountability, because you don't want to let people down. If you keep it to yourself, it's so easy to back away, and you'll find that as you make progress, that doubt will get a lot quieter.
It is one of the positives of social media, and through all its negativity, the accountability is something that I find has rung true. This winter period, I've done my own little creative challenge of writing every day, and I write 2 double-sided pieces of paper a day, and I posted them for the first 70 odd days on social media. I've stopped posting them because I got very busy, but when I stopped posting them, there was that kind of, I don't have to do it. So it was harder to force myself to do it on the days when I stopped actually putting it online.
Do people start saying, "Hey, where's the writing?"
I don't think people really cared. I think I just lost the flow in because it's that extra step of, and I deleted the app off my phone, so I have to re-download it every day and go through all the permissions and then blur out all my writing and put it on. There's the kind of time it took was just a bit of a daily chore. I've still carried on, and I've gone maybe 2 weeks without posting online. But I want to do it because I want to keep that accountability. And there's very tough days when it's like, I could not do this and no one would know. But thankfully, I guess I started building up that accountability at the beginning. It's made me reshape how I do, challenges and adventures going forward as well. It's just, especially the creative ones, which are really hard to do because, life gets in the way. But that's the same with any challenge.
Yeah, accountability for me is key. And you've got to hold yourself accountable, but it helps having people holding you accountable, and for me, I just don't like to let anybody down. So if I commit to something, but do or die, I want to find a way to do it, and I think if you give yourself a plan B, if you give yourself an easy option, you're probably going to take it. That's what I found, so I really try and sort of kind of question people, if they're not putting it out in the public domain, why is that? Is it because they don't want to be held accountable if they change their mind? And if you really, really want it, you'll find a way. But maybe that's just how I'm wired. I don't know.
Yeah, and if you get yourself to the start line, you might surprise yourself.
And the 80% of things that we worry about never even happen, or they're not as bad as we think they will. There's always more to gain by doing it than not doing it, in my experience.
Great. Well, that's a lovely place to end it. Thank you very much for Alex for your time. I'm looking forward to following your grand adventure that's happening later this year. People can follow you on your social media. I'm sure you'll be posting a lot about it and raising great money for Mind Over Mountains. What a great cause. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure as always.
Thanks so much for tuning in. If you want to find out more information about any of the guests, please check out the show notes where you'll also find links to things mentioned in the conversation. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please take a look through the past recordings. There's so many more incredible stories for you to find, and I can't wait for you to enjoy them. Thank you.